Hi, welcome back guys. This is your sensei, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Failed Naruto Got Harem. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Use me, the frenzied flame sang to Naruto. Unleash me, it sang to him as he stared at the remnants of Marika's fractured body, his final victim. Burn this rotten world to ash. He felt it whispering in his veins, boiling in his BLD, awaiting his command. It would be so easy to give in to his impulses and let loose, unleash it upon the lands between after all it had taken from him. And it had taken so very much indeed. All those he tried to help, dead or even worse off. Death might have been a kindness for some. It certainly would have been for Renala and Selen. The others weren't much better off. Blade, driven to madness, forced to be put down like the mad dog Naruto knew he wasn't. Iji dead in a bed of black fire. Nephili, a ruined wreck bereft of purpose, one he couldn't rouse. Yura fell to his beloved's blade. Zorius forgot all about him. Fops lay in the academy, broken by forbidden knowledge. It did stop there. Bach lost a foolish rebirth, the very thing he'd warned the little seamster against. Alexander shattered in Farum Azula. Bogart butchered and defiled by a mad lunatic. Millicent crumbled into a pool of rot. Fia withered in a bed of roots. Melina, who would have burned herself alive, abandoned him instead, cursing him for taking her purpose. He hadn't even a chance to say goodbye. Roderka and Hugh had refused to leave the hold, and so burned alive with the Erdtree and Nephili. Rani had fled out of cowardice, deserting this world for the cold stars above. She hadn't believed in him, either. Last came Hayata, poor sweet Hayata, the sole survivor, the one he'd tried to protect the most, until she melted in his grasp. And with her death, he lost the last sliver of pity. His enemies ... he'd killed and killed and killed them all, gods, legends, demigods all, until his joints ached and he could barely move his arms anymore. The Elden Beast had been his final victim. An emissary of a god, it too, had died screaming as he burned it from the inside. Blade's armor had served him well to the last, helped him tank hits he had no business enduring. He'd been outright reckless by the end. Now its purpose was past, the ruined armor cast aside, leaving him clad in a white tunic and battered black breeches. Hayata had once called it an auspicious garb for the Lord of Frenzy. He'd laughed with her at the time. He missed her voice. Too much pain, too much death. What was the point of a world like this, the final boss defeated, when he had nothing to show for it? He didn't want any empty throne. He wanted his friends, his family. Blue eyes blazed with golden fire. Before creation there must come destruction. And after death, rebirth. But he didn't want that kind death. Not really. He wanted to reset it all and start over. If only there was such a thing. He'd settle for an end instead. Use me, my lord. He intended to. On his terms. In truth, the frenzied flame had been tamed from the moment he took it into his body. That once uncontrollable blaze was broken and bent to his will like a beast of burden. The very essence of an outer god made his, all that power burning at his fingertips. Now it was eager to serve, to please him. He would have felt bad if it hadn't been so inherently evil. It was no match for his and Kurama's willpower. Even now it awaited his command, ready to consume all at his will. Even if this was a hollow victory, what was the point in winning if he did so alone? If only Melina had listened. If only Millicent kept the needle in. If only Hayata stopped eating those GS. None of this would have been necessary if they stopped being so stubborn and opened their ears. But they hadn't, she didn't, and she wouldn't. No one did. No one wanted to listen. They all thought they knew better. If only he'd used it sooner. If only he'd made them listen to him. He'd been foolish to ever think he could have a life here. If only, so many ifs. A burning leaf fluttered down from on high and landed in his hand. Naruto caught it, watched now as it smoldered away into gray ash. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. Tendrils of hungry gold flame crept up his body. He grabbed them, directed them, sent them shooting down into the base of the tree, preparing to tear it out, root and stem. Even then, he lingered, waiting for Melina to appear and at least try to stop him. She didn't. Somehow, that hurt even worse. Even now, in his moment of triumph, she didn't dare show her face. But her words lingered. You are no longer fit. He snarled at the memory and the flame cracked angrily within him. Kurama felt it. You sure about this? This ain't something you can take back. Only a few short months ago, he would have said no. Would have tried to find another way. But now, yeah. Alright, then, let's give this world a show to remember. Naruto focused the flames, not letting them spread out as it initially wished, but instead wrapping them around the Erdtree and the Erdtree alone. He would not destroy everything. Even now, at his lowest point, he was better than that. He forced the flames higher, wrapping them around every face of the russet red trunk before him. With destined death unleashed, there would be gods and immortality here no longer. Only mortal men and beasts. They could fight over this crumbling world to their heart's content for all he cared. He wouldn't be here to see it. If his friends and family weren't here, then he didn't want to be here either. Burn it all, start over, and go back. I want to go home. A lone tear rolled down his cheek and burned way to steam. Naruto felt a muscle jump in his jaw, his eyes glowing gold. He leaned his head back as the ash began to rain down around him. He'd scorched a hole through the ceiling, enough to see the stars high above, thin through the smoke. Are you watching me, Melina? He spoke to the dead, empty air. How about you, Rani? Do you still think I'm wrong? He eyed the ring on his finger, once her promise to him, now cold, dead metal. Even so, he couldn't bring himself to remove it. He regarded it now with a wistful sigh as his body began to crack and burn. I wish you'd scold me for this. Her parting words had stung too, hadn't they? I will have no part of this madness, consort. She'd said that to him. If you wish to burn the world, that is your business, not mine. This is where we part ways. At least she rebuked him before she left, even if she didn't understand. He wasn't going to burn the world. He'd had everything under control. Here at last, anger sparked in him. What was the point in control now? He could survive this if he truly wanted to. But he didn't. His body could burn away for all he cared. I hope you're enjoying yourself up there. His fists clenched at his sides as he hollered up at the stars. I hope it's everything you ever wanted. Enjoy your cold night. I hope you freeze. No response? Naruto palmed his face, stifling a bitter laugh in his palm. His shoulders shook with humorless mirth. Listen to me, shouting at the sky. I've lost my mind. I can't even bring myself to be angry anymore. There was no answer to his final plea. No, of course not. Even now he clung to one last bit of hope that someone would say something, do something, try to reason with him. But they didn't. Melina was likely still hiding from him, lurking in a land away for fear of what he might do to her. He didn't want to do anything untoward to her. He just wanted to hug her, make her understand, you know. All this. He'd done all this so she could live, so everyone could live, not die. He closed his eyes. Golden flame flowed beneath the shut lids to flow down his back, fanning out like wings on either side of him. His eyes snapped open. You were the one I wasn't supposed to lose. Still no answer. All right then. He grit his teeth, fists clenching at his sides, body blazing gold. Watch closely now, wherever you are. I've got one last ace up my sleeve. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with air one last time. The flame of frenzy responded and swelled within him, lashing itself ever tighter to the tree. Bark burnt and buckled beneath its grasp, unable to resist the power he brought to bear. He let it, waited, felt his power build. Until, there, Naruto threw his head back with a howl, and so too did the frenzied flame roared with its new MSTR. Together they screamed. They screamed and screamed and screamed. All their rage, all their sorrow, all their spite. Beneath those golden flames the tree became so much ash. It crumbled and fell down around them, hollowed out from within by the flame. Fragments buffeted Naruto's body, which even now began to burn, cooking from the inside out. He didn't stop. He directed the flame onward and upward, refusing to spare so much as a single branch. This era would end, once and for all. In cleansing fire, the world was reborn anew. Naruto wasn't there to see it. He was already gone. Cold eyes opened in the dark, beheld the frenzied flame burning in the world below. What a foolish consort. And more fool I, for not believing in him. It was too late now, wasn't it? She could not go back. Such was her lot in life. Always, always, always too late. The sky burned black. Melina saw it all. From her distant perch atop a crumbling building, she beheld the fire. Indeed, from afar the frenzied flame burned like a beacon in the night. An impossible heat felt even here on the capital outskirts. It was fire. It was death. It was the end of life itself. All would be consumed before it, just as she'd first feared. She watched and waited for it to spread, knowing it would consume the lands between as was its wont. But it didn't. Make no mistake, the flames burned high and hot, but only upward. Not outward. Fingers of golden flame scorched away the clouds in a proverbial pillar of molten death, straining for the very stars themselves as though it wished to rip them out the sky and cast them down to earth. Trapped within that pillar, the tree stood no chance. It had already been weakened by the giant's flame. The frenzied flame merely finished what had begun so long ago. She couldn't approach. The flames were too hot. The very air burned. To come any closer promised certain death. And yet for all its wrath frenzied flame did not spread. Although the tree began to crack and crumble, the fires of frenzy did not consume the capital. Melina could feel their hunger, their anger, their burning need to destroy, but they didn't move beyond the roots. Restrained by some unseen hand, they scarred the sky itself. No more. Almost as if they were being leashed somehow. Realization broke in a bitter dawn, sending her hearkening back to an old argument, one they'd had before their parting. I can control it. You cannot. I can. Melina crumpled to her knees. No. For an instant, she could have sworn she felt his hand on her shoulder. Imagined his words. Are you happy? No. She felt his spirit pass from this world a moment later, and knew the lands between were lesser for it. Just like that. He was gone. She couldn't even bring herself to speak further, such was her shock. He'd kept his word. And she, faithless wretch that she was, had abandoned him. Naruto had proven himself all along. For all her surety she had been wrong. Not only did he control the frenzied flame, but he made certain it burned out with him, never to trouble the land again. When the last of the tree crumbled, she felt a shift in the air in herself. With the tree's destruction and the elden beast within, destined death crept back into the lands between once more. All were made mortal once again, herself included. She could feel her immortality slipping away and her strength alongside it. These people, the survivors, would live their fleeting lives as they were meant to. As would she. Given time, she knew the cycle would repair itself and a new kingdom would rise from the ashes of Lanedell. But what of her? She was bereft, adrift, alone. Worse, she had no one to blame but herself. If only she had stayed by his side. If only she had listened to his pleas. But she hadn't now, had she? She'd been so certain of herself, so sure that he would fail in his quest or worse, be consumed by the frenzied flame. He'd called to her one last time there, before the end. Begging, pleading. She'd heard him, could have gone to him, could have prevented this. Perhaps, if she'd been by his side at the end, he wouldn't have felt the need to sacrifice himself. She could have saved HM. ... And she hadn't. Coward, coward, coward. Anger roared in her, at herself, at the world. Melina drew herself upright and walked to the tree. What remained of it? Her feet landed in scalding ashes, burning the soles of her bare feet. She didn't even feel the pain, numb as she has. Not remained. Even the roots had been burned away. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. With the last of her fading strength she reached out and pulled, trying to find something, anything to latch onto. Nothing happened. There was naught to draw back. Naruto was well and truly gone. She raised her gaze to regard the horizon. There was no sunrise, no stars. The shadows crept in, a deep, cloying darkness that promised naught but peace. There would be none for her. You had the last laugh after all, my friend. My love. Never again would she look into the only eyes that ever knew the real her. Never again would she see that silly smile of his as their merry little band sat round a warm fire. Never again would she hold his hand as they made love in the darkened halls of the Round Table. She'd lost him now, utterly and truly, through no fault but her own. The realization was a dagger in her heart. If she had but stayed by his side a little longer, this might never have come to pass. In seeking to prevent such an ending ... she had guaranteed it. Tiwa's irony at its most bittersweet. A glint of light in the ash caught her eye. She stooped to inspect it. Naruto's armor and weapons were long gone, but the melted scraps of his headband remained, bound by burnt black cloth. Trembling fingers curled around it. A broken, bitter sigh fled from her lips. She could still see the insignia etched into it, preserved despite all else. What was she to do now? Her eyes stung, her sealed orb drifting open at last as thick, heavy tears rolled down her cheeks. She fell to her knees once more. You were the one after all. Fate was foul. Destiny, demented. And so she was left behind once again. I'm sorry. She said the words too late. Please, forgive me. Melina fell to her knees in his ash, clutched he headband to her scent, bowed her head, and wept. You've leapt past me once again, gone somewhere I cannot reach you. 'Tis not fair ... Not fair at all, Naruto. Reality came unmoored like a rusty anchor. Lurched now, water flowing in reverse. Time unwound anew. Blue eyes opened. ... Wait. That wasn't right. Grass tickled his back through his tattered tunic. Naruto blinked, frowned, squinted now against the harsh light that hadn't been there a moment before. It didn't make any sense. He died in darkness. There shouldn't be any light. Said frown became a scowl as he raised a hand to shade his face. Sure enough, he beheld an intact limb. He shouldn't even have hands at all for that matter, not after he'd burned himself to ash. He squinted at his palm, frowning as he forced his fingers into a fist. It wasn't light, he realized, once his eyes adjusted. He knew its source all too well. No, he desperately didn't want to look up, didn't want to confirm his suspicions, if only because he intrinsically knew what he'd find waiting for him there in the sky. It wasn't just the sun, he could see that creeping lower in his peripherals, nearly ready to set. No, the light he loathed came from another source, one he'd come to loathe beyond anything else. No, his eyes betrayed him. No, 1,000 times no. A harsh, bitter bark of laughter filled the air. It took Naruto a moment to realize it belonged to him. ... Is this some kind of a sick joke? Certainly felt like one, it did, because the bloody tree awaited him the moment he raised his gaze, a shining golden specter looming in the distance. It burned no longer, its very presence was a splinter in his soul, pricking his conscience, mocking him for his failure. He sat up fully and spared a furious glance for his surroundings. It only served to confirm his suspicions. The hell am I doing back in Limgrave? And near a site of grace at that. Those were supposed to be gone. They'd evaporated after he became the Lord of Frenzy. Had he failed after all? He'd intended to die, and hopefully in dying, kick himself back to his world, or barring that have some semblance of peace. But he had neither. His body was intact, and so too were his memories. They writhed in his head like worms. The tree stood firm and strong in the distance, mocking him for his failure. He couldn't even die properly. A racing gun snarled in his hand. In that case, safe. A thin, reedy voice stirred in his mind before he could pitch over the edge. Safe. Softer, now. Relax. Naruto felt his world spin round again. Though his great runes were gone, he could still feel the scarring across his and beneath the shirt, the power pulsing within. The frenzied flame lived in him still, leashed as before, an obedient hound waiting to serve, yet faint, muted, hiding, concealing itself. He could call upon it at a moment's notice, burn everything to ash, but he didn't want to. He wanted to understand. Why the hell am I here? Hirama, you there? Answer me. Well, this is a most unpleasant awakening. His heart ached at the reminder. Don't use Ranny's words. He felt a spark of chagrin from his old friend, his last loyal companion, even now. Sorry, wasn't his fault. Ranny had said those 7 sorrowful words to Celibus once ... just before she tore him apart. The SDRD's own fault after he'd tried to feed her that amber draft. Watching that perverse puppeteer torn limb from limb had been one of his finer moments in the past, one of the few things that actually worked in his favor. Before everything went wrong. And now here he was, all his work undone. Just thinking of it drew a growl from Naruto. He burst and stomped forward a few paces and made it to the cliff where, finally, his temper got the better of him. His world went red. Damn it. A fist swept back and smashed a crater in the ground. Damn it. Unsatisfied, Bai struck again. The crater deepened, widening into a basin. Damnitall. A third and final blow bloodied his knuckles, but BRTH a gaping fissure, sending trees plummeting into the abyss. An awful crack filled his ears as massive portion of the cliffside split off and plummeted to the beach below. He didn't spare it so much as a second glance to fix it. Instead he stomped back to the site of grace he'd seen and plonked down beside it in a huff. His hand would heal sooner or later. Again, yet again, now. We're back where we started all those months ago, but why? Your guess is as good as mine. Silence trickled between them as they watched the last of the sun's light fade from the sky. Wait, light. He'd seen a light before he woke up here. An inkling dawned. He opened his right hand. Oi, frenzy. You have anything to do with this? Embers of dull gold danced to life in his open palm. You wished. I granted. Naruto's brow shot up into his hair, anger rising with it. You did this. I want to go home. Words, you said them. He closed his eyes and bit back a curse. Where did you take me, exactly? Beginning. It was only a supreme effort of will that saved him from another fit. Go home. Yes, he'd said that, hadn't he? The frenzied flame had granted his wish, albeit in an unintended way. Indeed, the lands between had been his home for a time. It must have seized on his longing and brought him back to the beginning. Doing so must have weakened it to an extent, yet its power still burned like a brand within him. More than that, he'd been brought back with his memories and power mostly intact. He even had those blasted flasks Melina gave him, none of which would get him out of this situation. This isn't what I meant. He snapped at it, drawing a childlike whimper from the parasite. When I said I want to go home, I didn't mean here. I wanted to go back to the elemental nations, not relive my failures again. Fix this. Can't ... Too weak. Sorry, wasn't that just peaky? His luck was rotten as ever. Footsteps reached his ears, faint steps in the gloom. He craned his neck. Oh, my. A familiar voice crooned from the dark, dripping false sincerity. I thought I heard a noise. Are you all right? A figure stepped into the light of the grace, idly rubbing bloody hands together as he approached. Naruto recognized the ghastly white mask, those wretched surgeon robes. A hand slipped behind his back, reaching to a knife. Var. If that wasn't proof enough that he'd landed in the past, he didn't know what was. He'd seen Selen slay him the last time around. Blasted bloody finger. He'd looked better without his head. Tarnished are we. The madman prattled on, heedless of his growing ire. Come to the lands between for the Elden Ring, His mistook his silence for acceptance. Of course you have, no shame in it. Unfortunately for you, however, and he could just imagine his face twisting in that horrid smile of his behind that mask, you seem to be. Naruto absolutely hissed. No. They were not doing this tick again. Maidenless. The insult had meant nothing to him during his first go-around. Why would it? Now, it cut deeper than Malekith's blade. Reminded him of his every failure. Right, he dies. He'd let him live too long last time. That had proven a mistake. Selen and Alina paid in BLD for it before he finally went down. To say nothing of the madness that followed with Moog. No, best to have him out the way here and now than risk his interference a second time. The frenzied flame stirred in him. Enemy, the worst kind. The sort that would pretend to be your friend then stab you in the back at the earliest opportunity. A fresh peal of laughter tumbled out of him. You never change, do you? Here at last, Var seemed to notice his ire. Have we ... met? In a sense, things aren't the way they were before, Var. He shook his head and climbed to his feet, motes of golden light rising around him. You wouldn't even recognize me anymore. A quick step carried him forward, bringing him well within the bloody finger's guard. Not that you knew me back then, anyway. Yes, well, he'll just be going. Come now, don't be a stranger. He grabbed the surgeon by his garb and yanked him close. We have so much to discuss. I'd like you to assist me with a few tests. You don't mind, right? His eyes shone with the golden light of the frenzied flame. No, of course you don't. He seized the man's wrist with free hand, locking him in place. It's the least you can do. What are you doing? His grin grew. Doing the world a favor. Frenzied fire roared out of him, eager for to do his bidding. Var was powerless to resist. He recoiled with a shriek and thrashed back out of his grasp, but it was too late. The damage done. He would have its due. Naruto let the bloody finger go and watched him writhe, let him clutch at his face as the frenzied flame cooked him from the inside out. It was the work of moments. His mask cooked and melted, clinging to his face, muffling his final cry. He expired with a dusty rattle, fell to his knees, and moved no more. Runes rushed into him, warming his BLD. Naruto thumbed his chin, considering the crumbling corpse. Seems I can still use the frenzied incantations at least. Maybe erasing him would have been better ... Nah. He was tempted to leave him slumped there on the hill, a testament to death, but he thought better of it. First things first. Bending a knee, he began to rummage around in the man's robes, searching. Where was ... There. His fingers closed around damp metal, still faintly warm to the touch. He withdrew it and inspected it by the low light of the grace. It gleamed a burnished red in the golden light. Pure blood knight's medal. Selen had pried it off the man's corpse and given it to him, once. He'd not bothered with it last time, seeing as he'd gotten there the strong way. Might be useful this time around. I'll be taking this. He took the man's corpse too, burned it to ash, then blew those ashes away with a bit of wind chakra. Movement from below drew his eyes. The tree sentinel trotted along the plains below the site of grace, wholly oblivious to the brief bout of violence that just transpired. He considered challenging it as he hadn't last time, then thought better of it. No point wasting his strength on someone who had nothing to offer him. He already had a goal in mind. He could always visit the merchant and the church later, restock if need be. Ally, the flame needled him, a little stronger for its meal. Those of the caravan will worship you. You are their lord. I'll consider it. With one last lingering look their way, he sat back down at the sight of grace, tucked his knees into his ch and laid his chin atop them. His eyes slid shut, longing for the rest he'd been so cruelly denied. His mind whirled and churned. No point in venturing out just yet. He needed to think. Var's death wasn't much of a change in the greater scheme of things, but he found himself hesitant to venture further. Because he couldn't bear the idea of losing everyone again. So don't. Wanna run that by me again, Fur? Do I have to spell it out for you? Kurama huffed when he didn't answer. The way I see it, this is your hour. Second chance. You know what you did last time. How their journeys ended? No. Naruto did. He'd become painfully NTMT with their endings, and the myriad of mistakes that led to them. Most of them had been good people. Those who weren't, he'd managed to reform before their untimely ends. Even poor All Patches and Bernal didn't deserve to go out like that. Others were already mad, like Melinia and Radon, each of whom refused to listen to reason. He'd been forced to kill them both. Others, such as Millicent, had chosen to take their own lives rather than live on. No one wanted to listen. No one wanted to let him help. Respecting their wishes hadn't gotten him anywhere. Then use your knowledge to swing things in your favor. He opened his eyes for a moment, considering the gentle glow of the grace before him. Tempting, very tempting, almost terribly so. His fingers rubbed the bloody medallion beneath his jacket. In a sense, he already had a way of bartering with Melinia. He knew who was held captive in that cocoon down in Mogwen's mausoleum. Did he care enough to try? He wasn't sure. What if I fail? Won't fail. The flame nudged him before Kurama could. Too powerful now. Power, eh? A bitter chuckle escaped him as he hung his head. It'll take more than power this time around. He'd need to be clever. Use his head, you know. No more charging in like a lunatic or flying by the seat of his breath. He'd seen where that got him. Strategy was needed. There was a small part of him that was excited by it all. He knew who his enemies were, who not to trust, and who could be a true friend. He could do it right this time. So long as he was careful, so long as he didn't let his emotions get the better of him. Greetings, a voice called to him from the darkness, dashing his thoughts against the rocky crags of reality. Traveler from beyond the fog. Naruto's head shot upright, eyes bulging. BLD burned in his veins. He knew that voice. How could he forget? A cloaked shadow approached his fire, darkness gradually taking on shape and form. As he looked on aghast, she swept her hood back and knelt before him. She knelt and rugged back her hood. I am Melina. Memories stabbed him. You are no longer fit. A muscle jumped in Naruto's jaw, P&D alongside a vein in his temple. He stifled both as he gazed upon her. Melina. No. He stilled himself with a supreme effort, MSDR his brief surge of murderous intent. This wasn't his Melina. Not the one who wronged him. Not the wretch that abandoned him in his time of need and inadvertently brought about everyone's ruin through her own arrogance. Not yet. This ... he didn't know what this was. Some fever dream. He wanted to hug her. He wanted to shout at her. He wanted to cry. But he didn't. He absolutely did not dare, for fear of giving himself away. There was something different about her, too. It took him a moment to realize what it was, still rattled by her presence. And then he noticed it. Her brand. The trio of black marks that once sheathed her left eye now stood upon the opposite of her face, on the right, rather than her left, and the leftmost orb gleamed a strange gloam-like color. He could feel a strange power emanating from it. Cold, but strangely familiar. What did that mean? Naruto stared at her. Melina stared back, considering him grimly. I offer you an accord. Those 5 fearsome words hung heavy between them, heavy with expectation. Not content with that, she prattled on, saying the same words as she had during their first meeting. Naruto listened with half an ear as she droned on. This was different from their first meeting, too. He'd met her at the gate front back then. Instead she'd sought him out here, as if she were actively searching. Why? What was different? What had changed? Did it have something to do with her eye? And what of her offer? He could say no, he knew. Maybe he should. Just refute her and go on his merry way. Might even be easier. It would certainly spare him some anguish. But if he declined, she would surely seek out someone else. She might even get in his way. For some reason she couldn't seem to sense the frenzied flame within him either. If she had, she would have cursed him and fled by now. Was she not aware of it, or simply not commenting on it? What had changed? The frenzied flame nudged him. Weak. Hidden. Won't find. Right. It was weakened by bringing him back. Naruto gave it a brisk mental pat. Good girl. The flame cooed like the child it was. You need only take me with you. Melina's voice tugged him back to the present, drawing a frown to his face. To the foot of the tree. What say you? Naruto bit his lip, exhaled in a long sigh. He'd considered all possible angles, and so made his decision. Best to keep her close, and if she figured out what he was, if she tried to run well, he'd stop her. The shock of her betrayal had paralyzed him last time, slowed his reaction, allowed her to slip away into astral form where he couldn't reach her. He'd not make the mistake again. He didn't trust himself to speak. Not yet, not in her presence. He settled for a nod instead. Very well. She favored him with a wan smile, an expression oh so familiar. Let my hand rest upon you for but a moment. This time he wouldn't let her get away. This time, he would make her understand. This time, he would correct his mistakes. This time ... he would have it all. Melina vanished soon thereafter. Naruto didn't much mind. She did that. He'd never really figured out where the maiden went on her little jaunts the first time round. It had been something of a mystery, those brief hours when she left his side and went somewhere far away. He could still sense her well enough when she was nearby that he couldn't do so readily now meant she was decidedly elsewhere. No use worrying about it. She'd gone off somewhere again he knew, and she'd be back soon enough. It gave him time to move unmonitored. And time to test things. He believed himself to still be at his peak, but he had to be sure. What better way to confirm that than with a good old-fashioned scuffle? A sword whistled and at his head with a yowl, the sound of drawn steel snapped him back to reality. Naruto caught it with a bare hand, frowning only a little now as the edge bit into his palm. He still bled red. That was a good sign. Keen blue eyes considered the furious knight before him, the poor soul who even now threw all their weight against their blade in a vain attempt to skewer him. He wouldn't succeed. Godric's soldiers were numerous, but they lacked the strength and ferocity of their Redmane and Halatry cousins. Still, he'd noticed something just now. Was it just him, or were the enemies stronger this time around? He hadn't grown any weaker, yet this lot seemed faster than he remembered. He'd actually felt pain just now. Granted, he'd allowed it, but still. An ember of curiosity sparked to life in him. This bore investigating. I wonder. Sensing the weight of his regard, the knight in his grasp snarled at him and strained anew. Naruto took pity on him. He let go of the blade, swayed aside from the resultant swipe, then kicked off another, launching himself to safety as the oaf's greatsword splintered the earth. Bare feet settled on the grass, the ghost of a grin plucking at whiskered cheeks as the knight rushed him again. He weaved away from their wild swings, impressed by their determination if nothing else. They really were faster. Stronger, too. He barked a laugh, startled by the discovery. What fun. Kurama noticed it, too. That's mildly concerning. If the grunts are this strong, then just how tough are the bosses? One way to find out. The knight was still raising his sword from another overhand smash when Naruto blitzed him. A single punch folded the soldier in half over his arm. An elbow to the neck put him down, followed by a brisk stomp to his helmet to make sure he remained that way. 3 strikes. Last time it had taken only 1. He noted that and filed it away for later. Godric's men were supposedly weaklings. He wondered what that old oaf would be like this time round. Someone blew a horn. Alerted by his presence, more knights rushed him with their dogs. Naruto's brief bout of mirth faded as quickly as it came. Seems playtime's over. The largest of them moved a lance at his torso. He slapped it aside, casually conjuring a racing shuriken in his free hand as he let the knight rush past. A lazy overhand throw summarily dealt with the knights. Boost or no, their armor was still no match for the raw power of ninjutsu. He walked away to the backdrop of shrieking wind, their screams swiftly stifled in the vortex. A quick glance to confirm their fate that they stayed down. And he was off, sauntering toward the gate front. It was tempting to just hop on Torrent and speedrun Limgrave. Blitz everything it had to offer and move on to the real threat. Yes, the longing was certainly there, but he knew better than to give in to it this time. Instead, he reined himself in. He'd rushed last time and paid for it. If he stormed in like an idiot, he wouldn't be able to save everyone now, would he? His sixth sense twitched once more and unbidden, he found his gaze drawn toward the church he'd ignored. The frenzied flame tugged at him like a petulant child. Kale. Fine, he sighed. I'll go check on him. With his speed it was a simple matter to double back and slip into the ruined church undetected, even while taking care not to draw the sentinel's attention. It plodded on past as he ducked around a wall, wholly unaware of the massacre only a few yards away. Now there was a fight he'd surely win, but one he didn't need. Couldn't very well go wandering about when his clothes were falling apart now, could he? Maybe Kale had some proper armor for him this time around. Sure enough, he spied a familiar merchant nearby, huddled by a fire in the growing dark. He recognized the jolly red and white robes easily enough. Heard the melancholy tune from his instrument. He paused behind a pillar, listening the mournful melody, a dirge that stirred up old memories. He hadn't associated much with the scattered members of the caravan at first, didn't even know wholly who or what they were until he'd gone below the capital ... with Kale. What they'd seen down there, what they'd found, the horrors within. It still made him shiver. If that's what they expect from us, then that's what they shall get from us. Poor Kale. His people deserved better. So had he. Well, let's see how this goes. He stepped out. Kale saw him in the growing dark, his eyes were sharp as ever. Come warm yourself by the fire, friend. He beckoned to the fading flame. You've nothing to fear from me. The frenzied flame stirred in Naruto's scent, chirruping happily, like a child finding a long-lost friend. He approached warily. You're tarnished. The wizened old merchant tittered a little, perhaps noting his wariness. I can see it. And I can also see that you're not after my throat. Why not purchase a little something? Ever the eager entrepreneur, this one. I am Kale, purveyor of fine. He trailed off a moment later, scratching at his head. No, that's not right. He looked around, as though he had forgotten where he was. Paused, saw him, as he hadn't before. My lord, something came loose in his ch. Naruto's body locked up. There had been recognition in his words just now, as if he knew him. Surely that was impossible. Yet he dared to hope. Kale, I knew it. It is you. The merchant all but knelt before him, head scraping the ground. My lord, you are just as I remembered. Confused heat speared up the back of his neck. Stop that. Up with you. Kale responded like a loyal hound and leaped to his feet. Naruto clasped his arm, drawing him into a brisk embrace. It was good to have someone who remembered ... and terrifying in the same measure. He didn't know how Kale even knew. How did he remember him? Was the frenzied flame connected to those who wielded it? The fire was silent in his ch, and for once, Kurama had nothing to say. Kale had more than enough for all of them. By the flame, you look a mess. When was the last time you ate? No, don't answer that. Sit down. Let's get some proper food in you. Naruto let himself be wrestled down onto a log. In short order the old merchant had plates out for the both of them, little more than bread and cheese with a bit of meat on the side chased down by a bit of wine. But after all he'd been through it was the finest of feasts. A drink helped settle his nerves, gave him time to think, focus on the impossibility of it all. What do you remember? I saw the tree fall from afar, heard it burn and then. Kale touched a hand to his gray forehead. Well, that's rather strange. I didn't recall much of anything, until now. Another mystery. The frenzied flame didn't make so much as a peep. I'm at a loss myself. What's the last thing you recall? Kale looked him dead in the eye. Hayata. Naruto felt his composure crack. His face twitched. To his credit, Kale saw it. Poor lass. She's dead, isn't she? Naruto felt a rush of frenzied flame flare in his eyes. He beat it down until silence reigned supreme, polished off the last of his wine, and blew out a sigh. Don't suppose you still have that crafting kit. But of course, Kale practically moved the box into his arms. Here, I'll throw in a bit of LTHR armor as well, can't have you walking about in rags. They talked for hours, just the two of them, reminiscing about old times. About friends and foes alike, journeys taken and comrades lot. It felt ... good, in all honesty. A balm for his tired soul. Naruto wanted to cling onto it forever, even if he knew it couldn't last. Night was coming, the fire dimming, and while Melina had yet to return, she might at any moment. If she discovered them talking like this, he wasn't sure if he could reset from a reset, but he didn't want to find out. Look, he lowered his voice, I need you to keep quiet about this. Tell your fellow merchants if you gotta, but no one else can know. Yes, of course. Kale didn't even think to question him. Not after all they'd been through. I shall set out at once. He bustled upright, packing up camp, lashing items to his mule. This very instant, Naruto craned his head, regarding the rising moon. It's getting dark. These old eyes of mine can see just fine by moonlight. Kale spun back to him and clapped his shoulder. I shall spread the word to my brothers and sisters. He didn't miss the fervor in his eyes, the faint FLC cur of flame carrying from one lifetime to the next. You'll not finding us wanting him, Lord, not this time. When the time comes, we shall stand beside you. Here. He pressed something into his palm and belatedly, he realized he'd been given a worn horn of sorts. Send for us when you're ready. He gripped his arm. I meant what I said, Kale. This needs to be a secret. Pretty sure I'm not getting a third chance here. His former companion nodded once and drew back. You won't need one, not if these old bones of mine have anything to say about it. And you. He stared overlong at his ch, and belatedly, Naruto realized where to whom he was looking. You take good care of that you hear me, little flame. He suffered enough. The frenzied flame sang in his ch. It was enough for Kale. Until we meet again. A rueful smile tugged at the corner of his mouth as watched Kale swing himself up into the saddle. The crack of the reins and his wiry mule was off, skirting the tree sentinel's patrolling path. For an awful moment he feared the night might give chase, but no, it plodded on, blissfully oblivious to the merchant and the world at large. He envied its ignorance. Well, Kurama sighed. That happened. It certainly did. He shook his head. I didn't expect that. Maybe this'll work out after all. A cold chill crept into his bones, defying that very thought. And with it, he felt an all too familiar presence. You keep curious company. Naruto froze for a different reason. Don't turn around. Mustn't turn around. He'd absolutely snap if he turned around, so now. His body betrayed him, the faint creak of his new LTHR armor the sole sign of his distress. And he saw her. Remy. He hissed out a low breath. She appeared in a slow rush of pale blue light, manifesting as he looked on. Even now she remained much as he remembered in her snow-white robes with that drooping hat, pale blue body, and her forearm ... And oh, there was a difference there, too. Though he could see her soul peeking out just as before the wrong eye was open. Much as Melina's had been, the opposite orb was sealed. Why, another change he didn't understood. There was something afoot here, but for the life of him, he couldn't put his finger on it. She tilted her head to regard him. May I have a word? Worse, it ... hurt to see her again. They parted on better terms, but she betrayed him too, in the end. Leaden feet carried him forward. He wasn't sure whether he would slap her or try for a hug. The uncertainty alarmed him. "A pleasure to meet thee, Tarnished. I am the witch, Rena." She graced him with a thin smile, so like the one he knew. I'd heard tell of a Tarnished hurtling about atop a spectral steed, 4 hands steepled in her lap, fingers conjoined. And upon looking into the matter, the talk, I surmise, is of thee. Thou art possessed of the power, no, to call forth the spectral steed named Torrent. He rubbed the ring on his finger, hidden beneath his new LTHR gloves, and managed a numb nod. Nearly there, now. Her good eye lit up, her smile become a touch more genuine. It rooted him, as I had hoped. I was entrusted with this, for thee, by Torrent's former MSDR. She drew forth a small token from her pouch, one well known to him, for the very same rested in his pack. "'Tis a bell for calling forth spirits." How many times had he used that bell? More than once. Titch had been useful. Finlay, too. He still had their ashes with him, even now. Now there was a thought. Now it is thine. Blast, he'd spaced out. She was still speaking to do with as thou wishest. "Forgive mine intrusion, warrior. I doubt we shall again meet." She had no idea. How could she look at him with that face, speak to him with that voice, and say those words? But all the same, learn the lands between whilst thou can. How long will it be, I wonder, before the Tarnished tire of obeisance to the 2 fingers? It was too much. His facade fractured. A rusty chuckle escaped him. Ranny, sharp as ever, caught it at once. Her gaze lanced into him. "Why do you smile?" Naruto blinked. Was he smiling? He touched his lips, hid his face behind a hand, peeking out at her between open fingers. "I'm just happy." As Ranny would have sputtered a protest, wailed on his CH scent with her 4 hands. This one merely frowned at him. "Happy to meet a stranger. A most odd fellow thou art." His smile cracked, says the woman who started the shattering. She jolted. He knew the words were a dagger in her heart, her secret shame. That ... is a knowledge few possess. She found all 4 of her hands once more. "How did you come by it?" Now, I'm not knocking you for what you did." He shrugged, and through her own words, the very thing passed. Ranny had said, back in her face. "I wouldn't want to be bound to that thing either. I'm sure the 2 fingers are cursing you even now. Screw the rest, am I right? Who cares who lives and who dies, so long as you get to be free." Her brow drew down. "If thou seeketh the curse mark, I don't want anything to do with your dried-up corpse on that tower, Ranny." She jolted with a decidedly unladylike sound, her true name causing her no small amount of distress. A small, wicked part of him reveled in it, the panic in her eye. "Who art thou?" "Everything. And now, nothing." That would be telling. He took cold comfort in the slight widening of her eye, the hurt that flashed across her perfect face. Maybe it was wrong to hurt her like this. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe she deserved it. Maybe she didn't. Maybe. She didn't even remember what she'd done to him, yet for him it was an old wound and her fool words had torn off the scar. She'd hurt him, and a part of him wanted to hurt her back. Now he had. The feeling was fleeting, his joy ashes in his mouth. He had to get away from her. Now, before he did something stupid. "Say hello to Blade and Iji for me." His piece said, he drew himself up, sketched a shell bow, and walked away. "I'll be in touch." Wait. A cold mist coalesced at his ankles, freezing his feet where he stood. Oh, that was a new one. He hadn't seen her use that spell before. Naruto craned his neck, still bitterly amused by it all. Oh, now she wanted him to wait. She couldn't wait for him, but he had to for her. Where was the justice in that? The answer was simple. There was none. He would have to make his own. I misspoke. At length, Randy wilted beneath his gaze and lowered her hands, canceling the spell. "It was not my intent to anger you. I would have your name." A harsh bark of laughter split the air, angry and sharp. "I'm sure you would, Ranny." There was again that beat of panic in her eye. "I'm almost tempted to give it to you." A lifetime ago, he'd given her all that and more. A stupid boy head over heels. Not this time. He wasn't willing to open himself to her, not yet, not when everything was still so raw. But no, he thumbed his nose at her. "You're gonna have to work for it, this time. You'll know soon enough." I said, "Wait a moment." This time, he didn't let her distract him. "Don't worry." He waved over his back. "I'll give Radon your regards." There was something wrong with her Tarnished. Melina wondered what it was, yet try as she might, she just couldn't put her finger on it. She'd left him only for a short while to ascertain if Godric was in his proper place. He wasn't. Yet now that she had returned, she found him silent and dour, almost sullen, even. Stranger still was the way he acted toward her. Always with wariness, never quite taking his attention off her. Sometimes he would grant her the faint ghost of a smile, but he never once let his guard down in her presence. She could not blame him for such, of course. They hardly knew one another after all. Trust came with time and closeness, intimacy. He did not yet rely on her as she wished him to, but he surely would in time. And yet she couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching her. Did he suspect? Did he know the truth of what she was? Could he speak? Or did he just refuse to with her? He fought his way to the gate front with nary a sound, ripping apart Godric's men like straw dolls. Even a stray troll proved no match. Further up he stumbled upon a wounded woman wearing a red hood. He patted her head, listened to her woes, guided her to a windswept shack, then went on his way. Strange, very strange indeed. And then he arrived, foul Tarnished. Naruto's head snapped up. Well, at least some things were still the same. In search of the Elden Ring, yes, he knew that voice well, heard it coming from the castle pad up and to his right. Strange, there was no golden shimmer this time, yet the words continued. Emboldened by the flame of ambition. The frenzied flame seethed in him childishly. Not ambition. He gave her a little pat. There, Melina, you might want to step back. The kindling maiden bridled beside him. Pardon. A shadow fell over her. Naruto grabbed her by the waist and whisked her out of harm's way. Just as well he did, because an old friend came crashing down on the space they'd just vacated, blasting them with dirt and dust. A gnarled old cane swept through the haze, dissipating it a moment later to reveal the culprit. Someone must extinguish thy flame. He knew the towering horned figure all too well. Let it be Margit the Fell. Melina squirmed against him with a squeak, still tucked into his side. Naruto let her go half-heartedly as she vanished into astral form. Well, I'll give you this. A fist swept forward. You're right about one thing. A strong punch sent the omen skidding back. You're gonna fall. Morgott. In a way, he was responsible for all this, wasn't he? The Omen King and his Knights Cavalry had been an implacable enemy in his first go-around. They'd become such a pain that he'd rushed to Landel to deal with him. That was his first mistake. Rushing. In his haste to fix the lands between, he'd left himself begoated, poked and prodded, tricked at nearly every turn. Morgott's final words rang in his ears, even now. Thou art a fool. That's my line. Sorry. A savage grin tore across his face. I'm gonna take my rage out on you. He blared forward. Morgott moved to meet him in a whirl of death and paid dearly for it, croaking in surprise as he stomped down on his tail, using it as leverage to kick him away. He wasn't entirely sure if this was the Omen King in the flesh or just a projection like last time. He was certainly stronger than before, faster too. It was a noticeable difference compared to the boost he'd seen in the soldiers. Didn't matter. Only one of them would fall here today, and it wouldn't be him. He bowled forward, uncaring as the cane smote him across the CHSN. His LTHR armor did little to soften the blow. Irrelevant. A Racington flashed out, catching Morgott's ribs in a glancing blow before he managed to skitter back to safety. Naruto stomped after him. Always loved his leaping, this one. Never staying in one place for more than a moment. It wouldn't save him. BSDRD. This horn BSDRD. It was his fault. All his fault. Every last bit of it. Well, Morgott pivoted, conjuring a mighty golden hammer to his hand. Thou art of passing skill. Warrior BLD must truly run in thy veins, tarnished. Even now he sneered at him. So smug, so arrogant, so superior, slavishly devoting himself to a doomed world. Still, I do not fear you. How many times had he heard those words? Naruto snarled, eyes gleaming. His body blazed gold. You will. What madness was this? Morgott flailed backward, crying out in shock as clawed fingers raked across his CHSN, tearing another hole in his tattered cloak. Any closer and he might have lost his heart. He barely had time to comprehend the danger before that thing was on him again. This tarnished fought like a man possessed, with not a care in the world. Did he not fear death? There was no retreat, no effort to dodge or evade his blows. Nay, he barreled right through them, accepting each hit as though it were owed to him, and dealing back thrice the damage. He couldn't stand up to such an assault, not in this form. And yet, a strange feeling kindled in the old Omen CHSN as he fought on, a curious sensation he'd not experienced in an age. With each second that he saw that smile, it only grew stronger. When his foe began to laugh at him, a wild lilting sound that never seemed to end, he finally found a name for it. Fear. This was fear. Sheer bloody terror incarnate. I'm not in the mood, Margit. The tarnished parried a vicious swing with an equally vicious smile and struck back, causing his cane the blade within to creak ominously. Or should I say Morgott? Move, or I'll move you. He knew who he was. How? What madness is this? HMM. The man's eyes a fell sea curd with yellow fire, madness made manifest. Suppose that's the right word. His cane swept down, smacked into an open palm. I warned you. Breath blasted from his lungs as another punch folded him in half. I don't care if you're a projection or not. You're still my punching bag. A second blow sent stars dancing before his vision. See mir, you horn BSDRD. Class is in session. Ready to learn. Clenched knuckles hammered under Morgott's chin. A tooth whistled free. Even as his head snapped back, a golden hand caught him by the horns and reeled him in for another punishing blow. He reeled and tried to shield his face, but the hits came hot and heavy now, smashing aside his guard as though he wielded naught but a twig. He'd never been batted about like this before, not even in his younger His thoughts shattered in a spiraling scream of pain as a spinning kick shattered his left ankle. Bereft of balance, he buckled, catching himself with one palm. The tarnished pounced in his moment of weakness, driving a spiraling sphere into Morgott's exposed back. The pain sprawled him flat, and once more, the wretched tarnished took full advantage. His hated foe grabbed one of his horns, using it as a handhold to lever himself upright, swing his body around Morgott's neck. He landed on the Omen's startled shoulders, gripped his head and crack. Something popped in his neck and his fingers went numb, cane clattering out his grasp. The last of his strength failed him. Still the assault didn't end. A hand closed around his hair, yanking his head up. That's it, Morgott. The tarnished loomed over him, eyes ablaze. That's the look. I want you to remember this feeling. Take it to your grave. His lips moved of their own accord, body betraying him at the last. Mercy, mercy, huh. The tarnished ran a bloody hand through his hair. I wish I could give you some. Unfortunately, his hand scythed down. BLD spattered his face. I'm fresh out of mercy. Morgott's world began to dim. The fear didn't. It bleated in his heart, even now. Damn it, he heard the tarnished scoff. Seems he was a projection after all. The defenders died strong. Nephili could respect that much. She'd fought for every inch of ground into the castle. Each step was carved in storm and BLD. Already the idea of facing its MSTR alone daunted her. No one had heard from the Lord of Stormvale for nearly a fortnight now, and his gatekeeper was nowhere to be seen. Yet for all their absence, the castle's men fought like frenzied beasts, determined to the last. No quarter was offered and none given in this madhouse of slaughter. But said slaughter had taken its toll on her. She'd long since exhausted her flask of crimson tears, with not a grace in sight. Spent and weary, she ducked into an alcove to catch her breath, but now she found she didn't want to leave her shelter. Her arms were heavy, knees weak, her stamina yet to return. Worse, she could hear the noises within, ghastly screams and shrieks to chill the very soul. Stop. Nephili shook her head to rally her thoughts. She mustn't falter here. Father had entrusted her with this task. She must succeed. Failure was not an option. You're not supposed to be here. A new voice had her jumping. Nephili's heart leaped into her throat. A young man clad in battered LTHR armor squinted down at her just outside the alcove, tawny blonde hair shading blue eyes half-lidded with concern, whiskered cheeks dimpling in a frown. She tensed for her axis. If she was to die here, she would not disgrace herself. Wait. He had spoken to her. The defenders of Godric's castle were all silent, their tongues carved out by their lord to ensure they kept his secrets. Nephili released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Well met. I take it you're not one of Godric's, then. No. He offered her a hand. She clasped it and levered herself up, using him for balance. Felt the calluses beneath his fingers as her fingers gripped his. He didn't stumble when she set her weight against him. Not once. Didn't balk at the closeness of her presence. A blonde brow rose. Nothing more, nothing less. She considered him anew as she withdrew. The strength of his posture. The firmness of his jaw. Oh, no merchant at all, this. Here stood a warrior. They exchanged greetings from there, and she leaned his name. Naruto. Curious, but he did look a foreign sort. Doubtless another tarnished guided by grace. Well, this was of luck, wasn't it? She'd not thought to find an ally here. Had father sent someone else, or was her fate turning for the better? Worry nagged at her. She made her offer, subtly offering to aid him against the lord of the castle. Imagine her surprise then, when took her request in good grace and clapped her shoulder as though they were old friends. But they'd never met before, hadn't they? She'd been in many a battle, but surely she would have recalled someone like this. No, that wasn't important right now. Her thoughts mustn't get away from her, not while her mission remained paramount. Still, her eye strayed to the battered short sword at his hip. That's your weapon. Naruto shrugged. It's a loner. I'll find something better. Fair, shall we? He nodded. Together they fought their way through the keep. Against her, the defenders had held firm, but with her companion's aid, they faltered, falling to his ferocity. It was a thing of beauty and glory. Her axes tasted flesh time and again, hewing down all who dared stand in her way. Naruto proved himself no slouch either. What his sword could not strike, his fist shattered steel and stone alike, rending apart his foes. The sight made her shiver. Her BLD was already up from all the fighting, but this made her warm. He looked her way once as they fought for a brief moment. She could have sworn his eyes glowed gold. A strange, mesmerizing shade. Fire flowed from his fingers, scorching any who came close. It made her want to bask in that heat. In him, strange as it might sound, she felt stronger just being near him. Wild, frenzied, lost in the mad rush of battle. She couldn't get enough. More. She wanted more. No, she need more. One of the castle's Tamomen rushed her, gibbering. She cleaved it in twine with a single sweep of her axes. Laughter burst from her lips as the severed halves fell to the floor. You. Truly you are a warrior indeed. Naruto ducked a knight's jab, stove in their face, and flattened another under his heel. That's high praise, coming from you. He flung his sword past her face, nailing another knight to the wall before it could creep on HR. Nephili shivered anew. It was like he knew exactly what to say to do. To her, the right words to push her buttons. The moment they cleared a corridor, she lost herself to the madness. She dropped her weapons, grabbed Naruto by the face and embraced him roughly, physically pushing him back against a wall. He didn't reject her. Nay, no words were needed. His hand dove beneath her left leg and lifted, warm fingers tracing her thigh. Good. He understood what she wanted, the stress relief she sought. Easier that way. She made a pleased noise and pulled him closer, crushing her bosom against his armored scent, reaching for the clasps of his armor. Another scream echoed in the distance, a high, reedy shriek that had them reluctantly drawing apart. A faint scent reached her on air with it. Nephili paused, sniffed, frowned. What's it smell? It fouled the very winds. Naruto's face closed down. Nothing good. The moment lost, they ranged deeper into the castle, encountering less and less resistance as they went. The once stalwart defenders seemed frenzied now, fighting to get through them rather than defend their cherished home. Almost as if they were running away from something. Most were put to the sword, others allowed to flee. The reason for their fear soon became apparent as they reached the final bastion. And with it, the last of Nephili's guttered out at the sight. Bodies lay everywhere in the main courtyard. Some torn apart, others half-eaten, still more ripped into pieces, none of them among the living. A trail of BLD led to the inner keep, and with it, the awful smell only grew yet stronger. Even a troll had been slain and left to rot with the rest, its bloated body consumed by a cloud of flies. A human hadn't done this. It was too feral, too savage. Nephili gagged, covering her mouth with one hand. Ugh, the stench. What is this? She muttered, words muffled against her palm. What manner of beast kills and leaves its meat to spoil? Even Godric himself could not be so foul. Her companion had no answers for her as they plodded forward. Good. She didn't think she could stomach them. Together they stepped through another arch, ready to face Godric. Sure enough, they found him. Godric the Grafted was long dead, not but a corpse in the yard, grafted body sprawled out among rotten cobblestones. Great Rune nowhere to be seen. Judging by the smell, he'd been gone for some time. They crept closer and she beheld a myriad of wounds littering his large form. His pallid face frozen in some final expression of horror. Who could have done this? Naruto grabbed her by the arm and yanked her back. Something detached itself from the shadows of a nearby statue. The shape. She'd not seen it, not at first. Her throat closed. A pale, feral-looking creature clad in tattered rags DD itself over Godric's fallen form, ghostly skin glowing in the low light. Even its body was wrong, elongated and twisted, limbs stuck to its body at horrid angles, and the hideous impression of some twisted arachnid with a head several sizes too large to be natural, almost disproportionately so compared to its long, spindly limbs. Said limbs ended in razor-sharp claws SLCK with BLD, grisly stains matching the bloody ill-fitting crown wedged tight against its massive head. The twisted creature dipped lower to bite into Godric's corpse, and as it did, Nephili glimpsed at last the great rune etched into his CH. She felt her gorge rise the longer she looked upon it. Like someone had tried to fuse a man and a giant and a spider together, then given up halfway. Was this the horror of grafting? No, this was something worse. Much worse. Gostok. Nephili risked a glance backward. You know him. Naruto stepped forth, placing himself between her and the beast. I did. The creature's head snapped up at their approach. Well. It grinned at them, eyes pits of black rimmed by red, mouth a mess of crooked rotten fangs. What have we here? Come to see old Gostok, have ye? To bargain, to trade. Those baleful orbs centered on her. You do. Aren't you a peach? Nephili found herself stepping back. No. It saw, rasped a laugh and lurched toward them. Come closer, dearie. I don't bite ... much. Naruto made a noise of revulsion. What happened to you? Nephili shrank away. She remembered the name Gostok. It belonged to the humble if craven keeper of the gatehouse. This was him. What could have twisted him so? What could have made him such a monster? She couldn't even call this creature human. Whatever dregs of decency clung to this soul had long since been worn away, corrupted by something foul. This was not a man. No, this ... this was a beast. Happened. The thing that was once Gostok tittered wetly. Why, I just helped myself to a bit of parts, I did. Like the Lord before me. Parts. Nephili all but spat the word. You're a monster. It was the wrong thing to say. Monster, am I? The abomination rasped at her, bladed legs skittering as it turned to face them fully. You're one of them, aren't you? Bandits and burglars, the lot of you, braggarts all. Just like my fool of a father. You want to take my great rune, don't you? One of its many hands clutched at its CH. Hell, not of it, I won't. I'll show you. I'll make see. Just like the rest. No. Naruto shook his head slowly. His eyes were glowing again, Nephili noticed. You won't be showing us anything. Gostok lunged at them, jaws gaping wide. Bear witness. Gostok struck strong. Naruto almost found himself impressed by the savagery of his tackle. There was no rhyme or reason in his attacks, just wild, mindless fury as he tried to force him down to the ground. He had no thought for anything other than victory. Countless grasping arms rained down upon him, trying to rip and tear, rend and slash, claw him to pieces with single-minded savagery, and in doing so add his strength to his own. Whatever he'd once been, nothing remained. In that moment the mad spider managed to move his heart, if only a little. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Never could be. His right foot slid back half an inch under the assault before he steadied himself. Golden flame burned in his eyes as he gazed upon the spider. Gostok reared back to bite, fangs flashing in the low light. They'd never reach him. He hammered a knee into what passed for the abomination's stomach and left him retching for breath. Is that it? Naruto sighed and stepped back, leaving him wasted and gasping for air. I expected more. The frenzied flame sang in his CH, giggling like a small child. Weak. Hirama barked a laugh of his own. She's not wrong there. On that, they were in agreement. For a moment there he'd almost been shaken. Clearly his return had changed things. Gostok had never become such a twisted creature the first time around. He'd been an insignificant wretch back then, neither worthy of killing or true contempt. Killing Godric wasn't an accomplishment, rather merely a surprise. If this was all he could amount to in this new life, if this was the extent of his newfound grafted strength, then he was a joke. A wry smile touched the corner of his mouth. Gostok lunged with a yowl. Stop staring at me like that. I'll gouge your eyes out. The flame needled him. Shield. Nah, don't need it. Naruto planted his feet and took the tackle head on. Drove an elbow into the back of Gostok's neck, staggering him. Two scything arms slashed at his throat. He caught them by the wrists and squeezed in a vicious display of force. Wrists shattered in a shower of bone and BLD. Gostok recoiled with a shriek, scuttling away like his newfound namesake. What are you? Naruto stalked after him with a grin. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. He'd learned his lesson with Rani. No matter how furious he was, how angry he got, he couldn't go revealing himself. He saw the moment Nephili's fear finally gave way to revulsion, then revulsion to anger. She must have seen her chance to join the fray, because ducked beneath him to slam an axe into Godric's flank. It bounced off his hardened hide and he rounded on her with a shriek, but she remained unfazed, just as always. Ducking the counterblow, she chambered another swing and brought her sparking weapons cracking down on his neck. The LD flew through the air. Gostok squealed, reminding him a struck pig, recoiling with a shriek. Nephili grinned and gave chase, eyes alight. Naruto felt his heart soar at the familiar sight. Just like old times, in an instant he found himself caught up in a bittersweet memory. He remembered the last time he'd seen that look in her eyes, wrestling with one another before a warm hearth, firelight dancing over her dusky skin, the faint smile on her face and laughter in the air, fire in her eyes as she settled in his lap, pulled him close and smashed her lips against his. Never forget me. Lightning flashed from her axes, snapping him back to the present. Naruto shook his head and waded back in, crackling his knuckle to dispel his past. Nephili took a glancing blow to her ribs hit that drove her back half a pace and forced her to drink from her flask of crimson tears. He took the chance to step in, granted Gostok a wry smile and kicked him in the face, launching him across the courtyard. I just want to feel something, the wretch cried, flailing at him. Is that so wrong? It is when you become something like this. He batted aside another blow, then ducked as Nephili raced in. She saw her chance and leaped off his shoulders, using him as a springboard to alight on Gostok's spine. Her axes swung up and came down, biting deep into what passed for his twisted spine. The lunatic paid her no heed. Those baleful eyes remained fixed on him as he dodged a grasping hand, snagged another, and tore it clean off. This is where it ends for you. This from the man with burn marks all over his body. The last of Naruto's smile died an ugly death. He went cold as ice. Nephili favored him with a baffled look atop the spider's back, not quite comprehending. What do we mean by that? Naruto didn't answer. He kicked out instead. Godric's right knee shattered, but he used the remaining 7 to scuttle backward. Nephili vaulted away off his back, taking 3 more as she swept by. Finish him. It'd be a mercy at this point. Naruto blew out a sigh. Kurama wasn't wrong. This had become tedious. What's wrong? His voice rose over the creature's pained whimpers. You were talking a pretty big game there, but outside your speed, you aren't much. Even Godric was stronger than you. Gostok clutched at his ruined legs, glaring bloody red daggers at him. Quiet. No, never again. You didn't even give him a fair fight, did you? I said shut up. Make me. He waved away from the clawed swipe that followed, casually snatched up Godric's axe as he went, and swung it around. The blunt end brained the grafted Gostok with it, flattening him to the floor. You probably ambushed him, struck when he didn't expect you. Really, he ground the axe in, eyes flashing as his victim howled in pain. How else could someone so weak possibly kill him? All his weight pressed against it now, further pinning him. You only had one arm after all. I'm sure you were so jealous of him. How did you know that? How? Well, he was going to die anyway. He twisted the axe. I suppose you could say ... this is my second time around. He let up on the axe, giving Gostok a chance to breathe, if only for a moment. A hand closed around his CH-cent, and you're going to help me, friend. He grasped the great rune within. It sang at his touch. His fingers closed around it. Squeezed. No. Gostok batted him away and spat fire at him. Curious. He'd never done that before. Silence. Not a chance. The flames died as they stuck an open palm as he waded through, taking the heat in to fan the flame within. I kept my mouth shut, once. No longer. If I have something to say. Bam. Gostok's head snapped back, spitting fangs. I'm Manuel. Slam. A spinning kick cratered his CH-cent. Going to. Wham. He clasped both hands over his head and brought them smashing down on Gostok's engorged head. The grafted creature reeled and fell to the floor, trying to defend himself. Naruto didn't give himself the chance. Closing his heart to Gostok's gasp, he channeled chakra to his hand. A familiar whine filled his ears. Then he struck. A massive racing and smashed down on the abomination's back, shredding through it to crater the earth beneath and finish what he'd started. He heard something crack. Howled over the noise. Now. Say it. Gostok slumped in the crater he'd made. Wasted, broken, but still alive. His neck cracked, craning back to look at him. I know you, usurper. The frenzied flame recoiled in him, and Kurama with her. How in blazes is he moving? We broke every bone in his body. Usurper of flame. Bleary eyes focused their way, bringing with them an awful realization. He wasn't speaking to Gostok anymore. This ... this was something else. You will fail just as you did before. Naruto twitched. Who decided that? You. Did you do this? I don't even know who you are. You will soon, you mad little fool. The thing puppeteering Gostok's body sneered. You cannot save them all. Perfection is a fleeting dream. All shall become ash. Nephili swept down upon him. The final blow belonged to her. Even as Gostok tried to curse him, her storm axes bit deep into his neck and tasted victory. It was a clean cut, biting through his armor to neatly sever his head in a single. His crown skull struck the cobblestones, bounced once, rolled off the edge, and plummeted into the abyss, never to be seen again. Naruto found it fitting in for such a monster. Swaying on her legs, she turned to face him. Well fought. A faint smile touched her dark face. 'Twas a battle most bracing indeed. Only then did he notice the gaping tear in her collarbone, leading a good way down. It had also torn off her top. You're bleeding all over the place. She dropped an axe and touched a hand to her injury. So I am. She shook her flask of tears. Oh, it would seem I'm out. Her legs buckled. Naruto stepped to her and caught her without thinking. From there, he bit her to scent, laid hands on her collarbone, just shy of her bosom. Kept them there. His chakra, old and tired, stirred to life at his bidding once more and began to glimmer gold. Warm light rushed into her to mend her wounds. Nephili shifted a little, offering a pleased hum as he went to work. Her eyes met his, but she held her tongue for a time, letting him mend her body as best he could. Finally, she frowned at him and he knew she would be silent no longer. Are you certain we've not met? You seem most familiar. A hand rose to cup his cheek. Naruto shivered. It would be so easy to tell her. The part of him wanted to just tell her. Confiding in Kale had helped, but he'd only ever been a friend. To tell one of his lost loves ... that carried risks. Would she look upon him the same way? If he told her such a fantastic tale, would she even believe him? He knew the answer. She'd push him away. And if she knew the fate she'd befallen in her first life. No, he choked down the truth. We haven't. Oh, bleary eyes blinked. Strange, I couldn't sworn. No, never mind. Do you have the great rune? Here. He took his hands from her and held up his prize. You can have it. She faltered. You're giving it to me. I don't need it. And he didn't. He could smash right through to the Ur-tree if he wanted, just as he'd done last time. That had been his mistake. Rushing. He was going to be careful this time, thorough, just as he'd promised. It seemed a sound plan. But these changes were beginning to worry him. Melina appearing in the wrong place was one thing, but now this madness with Gostok. Just how much has this world changed? Nephili's hand squeezed his, drawing him back to her. You've fought nobly and well. Her voice made his BLD burn pleasantly. I live because of you. How shall I reward your efforts? He could see the spark in her eyes, the vague pretense she was using to get at him again. No surprise there, she'd always been the excitable sort. Her BLD was up, she'd not forgotten where they'd left off in the castle. And if he was being honest, he wanted her just as badly as she wanted him. A distraction, someone, to take his mind off the long road ahead. He let her raw him closer, until her lips were an inch from his own, even less now. Wait, a cry cut through his thoughts. Hold a moment. As one, they turned toward the noise. Someone clad in banished knight armor was racing their way from the way they'd come, taking the steps two at a time to catch up. Toll. That was Naruto's first thought of them. It proved a worrying one. With their face concealed in that full helmet, they were utterly unknown to him. Not quite a giant, but clearly not a normal human, either. They were at least a good head taller than him. He couldn't tell if that was a man or a woman, not with that thick plate armor. His brow furrowed at the sight. No, that wasn't quite right. He could feel something from this one. Muted perhaps, hidden, but still present. The knight looked past them to Gostok's corpse, and Godric's with him. He is dead. Nephili holstered her axes, preening a little. He is, slain by our hand. A frenzied flame cooed in Naruto's ch. Familiar. I thought as much. The knight rumbled, shoulders slumping in defeat. Blast it. I wanted to be the one to slay him. Still, you have my thanks. A frustrated sigh echoed within their helm. Forgive me my brusqueness. I am not ... used to wearing armor such as this. Naruto found himself. Then why not take off your helmet? I believe I shall. A merry laugh echoed within the stoic helm. With him dead, I suppose the need for this ruse is over ... and here I had hoped to sneak into the castle ... It would have been a grand ad indeed. The knight lifted their helmet. Long scarlet hair spilled forth, tumbling down their shoulders. A rich, leonine voice rumbled. That's much better. Naruto's heart slammed against his ch. The sun shone through the clouds in that instant and struck the stranger's face, forcing him to squint. For a wild moment he didn't know who he was looking at. He'd known many with red hair, even fought a few. But this voice, where had he heard it before? Had he heard it at all? He couldn't be sure. As though sensing his confusion, the light gradually dimmed, allowing him to glimpse the face framed by those scarlet tressors. He'd seen them before. He knew them. They'd been an implacable foe scoured by rot. Yet here they looked almost healthy, younger, too. A bit smaller perhaps, but still utterly unforgettable. He was looking at a dead demigod, one he'd slain personally. His mind revolted. No. This was wrong. All wrong. He shouldn't be here. He flung up his arms with a frustrated shout, unable to contain himself any longer. What are you doing here? My name is Radon, good sir, general of Kaled and leader of Her Majesty's armies. The knight granted them a jovial grin, though he spoke quickly. For your deeds here today, I owe you a debt of honor. You two seem like an honorable sort. I ask of you. Thus speaking, the great General Radon moved a large hand at them. Might you be interested in a bit of jolly cooperation? Radon. Naruto found himself looking at General Radon. Except he wasn't now, was he? They were not the same person ... were they? When he'd first found Radon so long ago, he'd been a raging madman blighted by years of rot and insanity, a mad dog he took no pleasure in putting down. But the current iteration of the infamous warrior here before him appeared happy and healthy, neither tall nor towering as the behemoth he knew and certainly not rotten, that much was true. Even his almighty vaunted star-scoured greatswords were nowhere to be seen, although perhaps that too was a part of his disguise, and that smile of his was downright infectious. He could feel Nephili's awe too, but also her confusion as Radon stepped into their personal space, offering a large hand. Might you be interested in a bit of jolly cooperation? When he didn't budge inidiously, a frown creased the demigod's tan face and his arm faltered a little, dipping but an inch. Forgive me, I'm being terribly rude, aren't I? The same arm came up to scratch the back of his head, casting them in his shadow. Wherever are my manners? Would you do me the honor of knowing your names? Or at the very least, your purpose here? Nephili bowed her head and murmured a greeting. Despite his best efforts, Naruto found himself stepping forward to grasp the hand and give his own name. I'm not your enemy. Radon boomed a rich laugh. I should hope not. I dare say you'd make mincemeat of me. Naruto flinched, if only because he'd done just that last time. Hirama commiserated. Katie, he wasn't like this when we met him the first time around. We would have gotten on well. They really would have, wouldn't they? In any case, Radon stepped past them to regard Godric and Gostok's fallen forms. These two were right reprobates. You did well to slay them. Her Majesty will be most pleased to be rid of such ilk. Nephili made a pleased noise at his side. You honor us, my lord. Nonsense. The honor is all yours. Naruto felt his thoughts turn inward as the two began to banter back and forth. Well, at least Godric and Gostok were just as foul in this strange second life as they were in the last. He chose not to correct Radon on who killed whom. There were more pressing questions at hand. THNGS had to ask. Earlier, you said you were the leader of an army. And which army would that be? Radon moved back to them, still wearing the disarming grin. Why, Lady Renala, of course. My dear mother. She rules from Rhea Lucaria. Naruto finished hoarsely. So you have heard tell of her. He had. He'd helped Selen slay her, put the madwoman out of her misery once and for all. One of his many regrets. That said, Lingrave is a foul and lawless place, as you well know. He did. He hadn't seen Roderica on the way up, either. That concerned him. He hoped the timid little tuner hadn't come to harm. We of the lakes do our best to maintain peace and order in the lands between, but our numbers are few. Radon looked toward the setting sun, and in doing so, he glimpsed a hint of something on the man's neck, an old wound or scar poorly healed. A scar most familiar. We'd be happy to welcome stalwart heroes such as yourselves into our ranks. Unless you had more pressing matters with Lord Gideon. Gideon? No, that scheming BSDRD wasn't important this time around, whatever form he'd taken. His gaze flitted to the scar on Radon's neck. Where did you get that? This. The demigod touched a hand to it. A parting gift from the madman Miquella and his consort Moog. Think nothing of it. Easy for him to say. Naruto nearly reeled back on his heels. It was only an ironclad sense of self-control that kept him from doing so. Miquella, Moog, that hadn't happened last time. Nalinia was one thing, but Miquella had been a faceless entity trapped in a cocoon, and Moog. Welcome, honored guest, to the birthplace of our dynasty. Moog had died. Strong. He and Melina saw to that. He remembered that much. What had changed, then? Why were they active in this cycle? What in blazes was going on here? Even now his head was spinning. What about the other demigods? Morgott, Rykard, Melinia, Marika. Were Godfrey and Godwin lurking around a corner somewhere, ready to surprise him? To say nothing of the more mortal friends he had made during his first go-around. Life was cruel. He knew that much. Had come to accept it, even. But this just wasn't fair. I have questions. So it would seem. Radon beamed. And I will be happy to answer them, comrade. But let us away from this place. He pivoted and beckoned to the exit. It isn't safe here. My companion is waiting near the secret passage just outside. An evening meal seems a poor way to repay thee for thy trouble, but it is the least we can do for now. I'm afraid I shall decline. Nephili interrupted them with a bow of her head. I must report to my father. And the great rune. You already have yours, my lord. Nephili quirked an eyebrow toward Gostok's corpse. I believe this one is ours by right of conquest. Right. He'd forgotten about that, hadn't he? But did they really need it? Here, now, right this very second. ... He knew the answer. Claiming Godric's great rune under Radon's watchful gaze would only draw attention to him, something he was very much trying to avoid in this cycle. Besides, he didn't need Godric's rune. There were others out there. Worst case scenario, he could try and smash his way into the Erd Tree or burn into it, if all else failed. A rune was power he didn't need. He'd more than enough ... for now. ... You can have it, Nephili. The warrior woman rounded on him, eyes wide. You're certain? Yup. Go on. Sensing her hesitation, he waved her on. You've earned it. After a beat of hesitation, she knelt to claim her prize. A quick breath to steady herself, and then HNNGH. Nephili slammed the rune into her CH scent, just above her bosom. Credit where it was due, she only grunted once, wobbled a little, and rose on bent knee. He offered her his forearm and she clasped it immediately, using him as a pillar to haul herself upright to her feet. And if she came a bit closer than was necessary ... Well, he wasn't complaining. Why thanks. Her dark eyes met his, half-lidded with some emotion he couldn't quite quantify. I shall see this reactivated at the Divine Tower forthwith. Of course, of course. Radon chuckled into a fist, not once faltering at the sight. You know where to find us afterward, my lady. Her dark gaze flitted back to him. Indeed I do. A lingering touch to Naruto's arm, a brush of her hips against his, her lips on his cheek, and then she was gone, departing back the way they'd come. He'd time enough to watch her touch the site of grace near Godric's corpse, then she was no more, vanishing in a swirl of golden splendor. Radon chortled softly at her departure. You'll have your hands full with that one. Lord Gideon doesn't take kindly to those who woo his daughter. Naruto nearly choked on his own spit. Gideon, an overprotective father in this lifetime. Would wonders never cease? The cheery redhead only beamed. A great rune would make a fine dowry, if nothing else. That might sway him. Please tell me you're joking. Radon only hummed and sauntered away. Naruto followed him on numb legs, praying he'd seen his fair share of surprises today. His wishes went unanswered. Life was cruel. Sightless eyes squinted in the dark. She could sense a presence, someone familiar. Life was terribly cruel indeed, because she was there, waiting for them, just outside. Begging your pardon, good sir, but do you have any GS? He shook off the vestige of memory, hissing at the past until it fell silent. Naruto bit his tongue until it ached. He knew what fate awaited her if he answered. Did he dare? Ah, there she is. Radon cried out suddenly behind him, snapping him back to the present moment. We met on the road. Was she who told me of the passage here. Naruto's heart skipped a beat as the merry general prattled on, blissfully unaware of his pain. My friend, he gestured expansively, allow me to introduce Lady Hyetta. His throat closed and his eyes blazed gold. Hello again, good general. She turned to face him, just as he remembered. Even her clothes were the same. Pray tell, who is that with you? How very strange. I can almost see him. Naruto made a frustrated noise, a hiss so soft he doubted anyone heard it. Kurama did. Calm down. She isn't the same Hyetta. But she was. She had to be. He wanted to hug her so damn bad. Take her into his arms and apologize for all he'd done wrong, never ever let her go. Yet he couldn't ... and no matter how much he might wish to. It made his ch ache. Why did this world mock him? Why was she here in the exact same spot as before? Was it not enough to shove Melina and Rani at him, to mock him with what could have been? Why, the frenzied flame cooed inside him like a forgotten child. Mother, where had that come from? Granted, Hyetta had been the one to lead him to the flame back then, but he'd chosen it to save Melina. So why in blazes was it calling her that? Mother, mother, mother. Stop that, dang it. Good sir. He blinked alarmed to find Hyetta staring at him and shook his head. It's nothing. My friend. Radon nudged him with an elbow. I didn't realize you knew her. You certainly get around, don't you? Anger sparked into fury, wrath Naruto barely managed to quell before it sparked out of control. Not his fault. Not his fault. Radon was just being his jolly, happy self. He didn't realize how much the words tore him apart. Surely the gregarious general never would have said them otherwise. He closed his eyes, inhaled, exhaled. A deep breath settled his spirits, if only just. We've never met. He looked away with a scowl. Have we? Hyetta stared at him with her sightless eyes. I've heard your voice before. I feel as though I know thee. Such a strange feeling. Hope kindled. You're mistaken. I don't believe so. She stepped to him. Might I hold your hand for a moment? Another memory took him in its teeth. Your hands are so rough, my lord. His hesitation cost him. Her fingertips brushed his. The frenzied flame sparked in him, leaped between their fingers and did something. He couldn't comprehend it. Are you all right? Naruto recoiled from it. From her, unable to bear the sound of her voice. Don't ask me that. Not with her voice. Please don't. No. Radon, bless his simple soul, moved himself between them and saved him from disaster. I didn't bring him here for you to pester him, Hyetta. With deft hands he guided the blind maiden down to a stump and claimed one for himself before rummaging around in a worn knapsack. Naruto idly noted the pair of tents nearby and nearly scoffed. Radon really had brought him right to his camp without so much as a care in the world, trusting he wouldn't do him wrong. Such trust was a rare thing indeed in the lands between. You remember where our rations are? Yes. We're to share our food with him before we make for Liurnia. Naruto felt his face furrow. What was this now? I didn't agree to travel with you. Radon quirked a brow. Have you somewhere else to be? I suppose not. He was on his way, after all. Just for a little while. Excellent. Once more, that infectious smile flashed out at him. But let us not speak of such dreary things. Come, eat. We have supplies aplenty. Forgive me, Hyetta stood suddenly, startling them both. I'm feeling a bit tired. I believe I'll turn in early for the night, if that's quite all right. Naruto's gaze flitted to her, wondering what could have brought about such a sudden change in mood. He didn't dare to hope. No, never hope. Hope was a poison. If he allowed him to hope, allowed himself to believe she might be his Hyetta, that she might remember something of what may or may not have been a past life ... No, he refused. Life was cruel. He couldn't allow himself to hope. Not yet. Radon remained oblivious to it all. Can you find your way to the tent alone? Hyetta nodded stiffly and stumbled away, leaving them in silence. Naruto tried not to watch her swaying hips. He failed utterly. Forgive her, Radon rumbled. She's been in a bit of a mood these past few days. I'll speak with her tomorrow. No need. Naruto looked away with a sigh. There's nothing to forgive. As you say, then. Radon really was a rather nice fellow. Turned out he was a dab hand at cooking, too. In a matter of minutes the two had a warm fire going, and a bit of freshly wrapped salted venison to warm their bellies. They are in comparative silence, neither saying a word. Time trickled by as the sun sank lower and lower in the sky. I'm sure you're wondering why I'm out here. Radon's voice broke the silence. Disguised like this, lurking in Limgrave. The thought had crossed my mind, yes. The redhead offered a low rasp of a chuckle. I suppose you could call it atonement, of a sort. Naruto tore off another chunk of venison with his teeth. Radon took his silence as an excuse to continue. The man you see before you is but a shell of what I once was. He took up a stray stick and used it to stir the fading fire. I am a demigod in name only these days. Baleful eyes looked up to meet his, and for once, there was no mirth in his gaze. When this madness began, I tried to bring order. The twig began to smolder and smoke in his grasp, consumed by the fire. He dropped it into the blaze and watched it burn, firelight casting dark shadows across his visage. But I was hasty, reckless. My men paid the price for my hubris upon the fields of Kaled. As did I. Was he talking about Melania? Naruto ached to ask him but he couldn't, if only because it might make him aware of even more changes. Now, I count every day as a blessing and strive to make up for my mistakes in the shattering. To atone, be it plucking weeds like Godric, holding back the stars for my family, even setting this wretched world to rights. Radon must have seen his pensive expression, because he waved him down. Worry not, I hardly intend to throw my life away. But I intend to atone all the same. Naruto reached for more venison, only to realize he'd polished it off during the telling. There's a story there, something you're not telling me. Another time, perhaps. And then, quite suddenly, the good general changed tact on him. Would you mind taking first watch tonight? Radon was such a jovial fellow, yet he sounded so tired in that instant. Naruto couldn't bring himself to refuse him. Reluctantly, he muttered an affirmative. Splendid. The general reached down to clap his shoulder. I'll see you in 4 hours' time. Don't let the fire burn out. There are worse things than wolves about at night. A beast howled in the distance, an awful warbling thing that ended in a rasping gurgle. Naruto grimaced. I'll be on my guard. That's all I ask, friend. Radon clasped his arm. May you never falter. Wake me if you see anything. So speaking, the good general took his leave and crawled into his tent. Just like that, Naruto found himself alone once more, with nothing but Kurama and the flame for company. The silence haunted him. What did the flame have to do with all this? Maybe it was connected between lifetimes times. Maybe it was fate finally taking pity on him again, as it had with Kale. Maybe it was just luck. The chances of stumbling into a revitalized Radon were slim, but the idea that Hayata might yet recognize him, remember him that was almost too good to be true. The refrain of the eternally lucky. Lucky, him. He'd lost everyone and everything the first time around and burned the Erdtree in a fit of apoplectic rage. Now this past that both was and wasn't the past continued to torment him at every turn. He could have accepted things if nothing was the same, if he'd landed in another universe, another reality. But he hadn't. Some things were the same here and others weren't. The contrast tormented him. He ached and he didn't know how to make it stop. The frenzied flame nudged him again. Naruto sighed. What is it now? Look, a golden swirl of fire sang in his open palm hand, manifesting in the telltale shape of a blade. He watched it warily, frowned now as it took on a familiar shape. Haunted blue eyes drank it in. If this was its way of trying to comfort him, then it left much to be desired. He'd left all his weapons behind in his last life. He knew he had. And yet, now how did this follow me? The frenzied flame sang in his accent. Promise, kept it safe. Miraculous little flame. He didn't know why he was surprised by its wonders anymore. So you did. I remember this weapon. He hoisted it high, watching it gleam in the moonlight. Hello, old friend. The dark moonlight greatsword shone sadly in his grasp, a miserable reminder of a pact once made with Rani, a promise left unkept. He closed his eyes and touched his head to its cool surface with a long-suffering sigh. The peerless metal brought him some meager measure of peace. It would do for now. Couldn't let anyone see this though, much less Hayata. Still, holding the blade brought back memories of happier times. Even if he couldn't let anyone see his guiding moonlight. Don't suppose you can hide this again? The flame preened. Can. Why? Wait a second. He reached down into his pouch, fiddling with it for a moment. Eventually he came up with a roll of gray cloth. A gift from a certain seamster, one he'd not had use for. Until now. Slowly, painstakingly, he began to wrap it around the blade. Once, then twice, moving in slow, steady loops when haste proved lacking. Fabric parted easily in his grasp, more so when he wrapped it around the blade. It was slow work, but in a matter of minutes he had the dull gleam concealed completely, buried to the hilt. There, he closed his eyes and returned the weapon to the flame to be summoned later. Using a bound sword might draw attention, but better that than folks seeing him wielding a weapon that belonged to carrion royalty. He had to keep himself in this blade, under wraps for now. By the log that was an awful joke. Mother, Naruto bridled, eyes still closed. Stop that, damn it. She's not your mother, and I'm not in the mood. Warm hands closed around his face, cutting him short. Oh, she had been trying to warn him, hadn't she? The flame preened. Told you, just as you give me everything. A familiar voice crooned in his ears, so too shall I give you my all. Until I am naught but ash. His eyes snapped open. Those words, he'd heard them before. Hayata, when had she left her tent? Hello again, my dear lord of frenzy. His maiden knelt before him, stared at him, unseeing, yet seeing him again all the same. It seems you're not rid of me just yet. A lone tear rolled down her cheek. How I've missed you. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Your flame spoke to me. She granted the ghost of a smile. Have you nothing else to say? Truly 'tis a rare thing to see you stricken silent. She drew his cheek in quiet, tentative circles. Did you miss me, perhaps? It really was her. In hindsight, Naruto really couldn't be blamed for what happened next, not with his emotions running this high. Clearly frenzied flame had done something again. Was it when they touched fingers? No. He didn't care what. Not here. Not now. Miss her. He'd missed her like hell. He grabbed Hayata by the waist, yanked her in, embraced her, strong. Much to his relief she made a startled then pleased noise against his mouth and planted herself in his lap, one hand briefly rising to twine against his hair before drifting lower, yanking at his trousers, parting her dress, hitching the garment to better get at him. He had just time enough to glimpse her pale thighs, then she braced both hands against his CH and shoved. He went down with a startled laugh, too stunned to do anything else. In a matter of moments she was atop him once more, tugging off the last of her dress, ripping his tunic away entirely. He rolled, pinning her beneath him. In turn she latched onto his neck, dragging him down, all but pulling him atop her. Take me, my lord. The words escaped her on a thread of breath. Now, just like you did that night. He tried to speak. Say something. Anything. Hayata wouldn't have it. She surged up, capturing his lips with hers once more. They made rough, wild love that night. Did you sleep well? There were no finer words to hear come morning, no better way to wake than to find oneself in the arms of your great love. If this was a dream, Naruto didn't want to wake up. He'd gladly sleep forever if it meant holding on to this moment. Here at last it felt like he'd escaped his nightmares if only for an instant. And he had slept, like a rock, a deep and dreamless slumber free from both nightmare and memory, wrapped up in the warmth of Hayata's embrace, free from the cares of the world. In truth, the jaded Jinchuriki couldn't believe the dawn had come so quickly because he barely remembered sleeping at all last night. He remembered other things, however, deliciously frantic moments in the dark, a balm to soothe the ragged edges of his soul. Hayata's body tangled up in his as she cried out his name, legs locking around her waist while she drew him closer. Nope, he realized as he took stock of himself. Definitely not a dream. His body was pleasantly sore in familiar places and he could still feel his back healing from where she dug her nails into his shoulders. No figment of his imagination could be this real, and if it were, well, then he truly was lost. She had to be real. This had to be real. It must be. If it wasn't, my lord, he blinked, only to find himself staring down into a familiar bosom. Lost in your thoughts again, I see. Hayata hummed. You seem to have become more introspective since we last met. He looked up to find her smiling. At least some things haven't changed. She cuddled closer to him as she spoke, spooned up against him for dear life. She held tight, nestling her head against his CH. I'd almost forgotten how passionate you were. His eyes were stinging. That was new. He thought the frenzied flame burned that out of him. I missed you, you know. And I you. She embraced his cheek. Very much. SLCK with sweat and spent, she curled against him and laid a hand on his bare, scarred CH. The wound there seemed to pulse with fire. Indeed, it was almost warm to the touch. But I must ask, did the flame truly inflict such an injury on you? He rose upon one elbow. You can see it. Of a sort. She tugged up her BLNDFLD and touched a hand to her blind eyes, allowing him to glimpse a hint of golden fire within. It comes and goes. Her lips pursed when he made a quizzical noise. I can see that which has been affected by the flame. Her hands cupped his face, allowing her to press her forehead to his. I can see you, for instance, but not your features. You burn a lovely shade of gold. I cannot say for certain whether my vision may be returning. It's fine, now. The scar doesn't hurt. He laid a hand over hers. She's nice and calm, really. The frenzied flame cooed within him in response, warm and content. If only he could say the same for his troubled heart. Hayata tilted her head. He grimaced. A few things happened after you died. Well, a lot of things. You might want to get comfortable. It wasn't strong to find their clothes. They'd already made a crude bed of sorts and laid atop them, the better to avoid rolling in the dirt. Naruto told her his tale of woe as they dressed themselves. Everything. All of it. Every bit. Hayata listened intently as she dressed herself, and if he watched her while she watched him. Well, neither complained. For once, he was inordinately grateful for Melina's absence. He didn't dare air this story in her hearing. She wouldn't take kindly to her purpose being subverted. Wherever she was right now, it wasn't here, and that was all that mattered. If she heard any of this, she'd assail with questions, shout and scream at him, possibly even leave. Not so Hayata. She waited until he was finished, then nodded dutifully. I understand. Just like that. I trust you implicitly. You didn't ask for this another go-around, yet here you are. I suppose we have the flame to thank for that. She quirked a pale brow as he tugged on his armor. Perhaps you merely brought a piece of it back with you, or mayhap you truly did tame it. Regardless, I owe it my thanks, else we wouldn't have this chance now. Frenzy chirruped all too happily. Welcome, mother. Naruto gulped. Hayata heard him. What is it? Nothing you need worry about. We'll need to find you something else to wear. She stepped to him and touched his CHsen, tutting over the state of his battered LTHR armor. A true lord shouldn't wear something like this. She said those very same words to him many a time before and they both knew it. You're welcome to try. I believe I shall. She drew him into another scorching embrace. I am with you, now and forever, my friend. Radon burst out of his tent with such speed that both of them jolted apart. You didn't wake me last night. Is everything all right? He paused, saw the two of them in one another's arms, tilted his head in confusion. Now, it rather reminded him of a giant dog. Am I interrupting? Heat hit Naruto's cheeks. Not at all. Hayata smiled. We believed you could use your rest, my lord. Oh, Radon thankfully missed the byplay. Bless his simple soul. Or so Naruto thought until his gaze strayed to Hayata's neck and noticed the bite marks there. A jolly grin split his face. So you knew one another after all. You sly dog. I should have known. Naruto slapped a hand to his forehead. Kurama couldn't help himself any longer. He burst into laughter. Now it was Hayata's turn to blush. Damn it, Radon. You trust too easily? Tarnished. Naruto supposed it was too much to hope Melina would stay absent a while longer. She made her reappearance some hours later as they drew nearer to Liurnia, manifesting behind him in a shower of blue light. Radon made a questioning noise at her sudden arrival and tried to wave her way, only for Hayata to take him by the arm and tug him along. Bless her for playing the distraction. He knew this was a long time coming. Do I now? He didn't deign to look at her as they walked for fear of giving himself away. You do. Heard her huff. First the warrior woman, then Radon, now this blind wench. His temper flashed, stirring the flame within. He took a deep breath to quell it. Her name is Hayata. Hayata, then. The kindling maiden conceded with a nod. My point still stands. Naruto heaved a sigh. She'd always been stubborn, even in their first time around. Noticed you didn't mention the big guy. Her elbow hit his ribs. He took it with a grunt and kept walking. Radon, I grant, is unlikely to betray you. He risked a glance out the corner of his eye to find her staring at the fallen general's broad back. He was ever the virtuous sort even before the disaster and Kaled diminished him. It pleases me to see that he survived, weakened though he is. The lands between are greater for his survival. He quirked a brow her way. You know him. The rare ghost of a smile touched her scarred visage. I know of him. There is a difference. That sentimental oaf. Yup, definitely knew him. Come to think of it, he'd never asked after her past, had he? In his first go-around he hadn't wanted to pry, rather, he'd never thought to. There had never been the need, and by the time there was, it was already too late. Now he found himself curious. Did he dare? No, he'd hold his tongue for now. He still wasn't certain if this was his Melina or a complete stranger. Prying now might only damage their fledgling friendship. He couldn't risk it. You are headed to Liurnia, yes. He blinked, drawn from his ruined reverie by Melina's abrupt inquiry. We are, yeah. Good. She nodded a little, pleased by his truthfulness. The Knights of the Lakes are an honorable lot, as is their queen. Take care not to bed her, would you? Oh, she was sniping at him now. A rare laugh burst from him. There it was. Contrary to popular belief, Melina had a sense of humor. You just had to jab her a bit before she started to jab back. I won't, he said instead. No need to worry about that. You say that now, her brow furrowed in offense, but the Lady Renala is a woman of unparalleled beauty. You may find yourself tempted. That would be unlikely. He'd pitied Renala in his first life, right until he drove a sword through her heart and freed her from that madness. Besides, I prefer my woman a little shorter. He winked her way and mimed emotion, trying to rile her up. Preferably around my height. Melina's face went red as a rose, a sight so painfully familiar that he felt his throat close all over again. He coughed to clear it, also somewhat sane. Her brow furrowed. Come on, he muttered, his mood ruined by her silence. We have a long journey ahead. Worry not, came her reply. I shall follow at a distance. ... See that you do. Melina took a deep breath to steel herself. Naruto sighed in return. There's something more, isn't there? I admit, I've been testing you. No. Not this, not now. He had neither the time nor the patience for it. If this is about the round table hold, it can wait. I want to check on something. Her good eye widened. How did you know? I'm not as dense as you think. His piece, said he, nudged past her. Melina tutted softly and watching him walk away all too quickly. Strange as ever, I see. Her feet paused, nearly catching an upturned root. She walked around it and dithered for a moment. Strange as ever. Why had she said that? For a moment there, their banter had felt terribly familiar. Almost as if it were commonplace, an everyday occurrence. She touched a hand to her head, felt pain in her face now and laid a hand against her cheek. It came away red. Melina frowned at it, gasped a little now when she saw the cause. Her nose was bleeding. Liurnia was ... not as Naruto knew it. He remembered a watery land beset by the aftermath of a terrible flood, its gate town sunk down into the ground, building degraded by years of decay. A realm infested by mad albinorics and crazed crayfish, to say nothing of the other abominations lurking in the swamps. He had found Dilos mourning his dead squire here, then later encountered Raya before finally bumbling into Bogart. It was here that he gave Thops a key to the academy, unknowing that the man would die there. Here that he helped Selen put Renala out of her misery, only to return and find her made a monster beyond his understanding. They had been his friends. Good friends, loyal friends. They didn't deserve those awful ends. Just thinking of them threatened to engulf him in bad memories. But when looked at Liurnia now, this was not that broken down town he'd hated so. Certainly not the dead one he knew. Perhaps it had been once upon a time, but now it was a bastion, more a fortress really, so much so that it was nigh impossible to tell where the town ended and the fort began. He could see fields being tilled by farmers, stables for horses, even an inn past the gate checkpoint. And there looming over it all, the Academy of Rhea Lucaria. That at least remained unchanged. Home again. Radon inhaled deeply, breathing in the misty morning air. It seems my redmanes have been busy in my absence. Come. He bounded down the hill and beckoned. We're due a warm welcome and a bit of stew besides. My family will be delighted to meet the man who slew Godric. Naruto nearly tripped over his own 2 feet. Family, why, yes, the weakened general preened. My wife and our children. They will be glad to meet thee. Another variation he hadn't accounted for. Just what was he walking into here? Mind if I ask about them? Just a little. Not at all. He puffed up like any proud parent would. My wife Priscilla is the light of my life, to say nothing of our children. The eldest just became a knight herself. Priscilla. He didn't know that name. No, never mind that. How many kids do you have? Only 3. The redhead chortled. A 4th is well on the way. How splendid. Hayata perked up on his arm, warming to the subject. You simply must tell us their names. I'd be more than happy to. There you are, you big BSTRD. A familiar voice brayed. Took you long enough. Naruto's head snapped to the right. A giant crayfish lumbered their way, bearing a man upon its back. My apologies, Bogart. Radon was all smiles in the face of this new arrival. But we returned triumphant. Godric is dead. Bogart, it really was him, iron mask and all. Strange to see him wearing armor. The former blackguard reared back atop his less than noble steed and squinted at him. What this, then? You seem familiar. We met before. Naruto grit his teeth until he felt something pop in his jaw. The pain centered him. The memories less so. The past tore at him, sharp and poignant as ever. Bogart dying on a chair, just outside Lanedale, defiled by the dung-eater. Kill me, mate. Please. I can't live like this. Make it stop. I'm sorry. He shook high head, choked out the word. It seems I was mistaken. Yes, fine. The man shrugged. I've met a lot of blokes in my day. Might have met you somewhere along the line. Want to talk about it over drinks? Maybe later. Naruto muttered an affirmative and stumbled away. Radon bade a quick farewell to Bogart and jogged ahead of them, looking rather subdued himself. Not once did he look back at the 2 of them, nor did he dare to pry at his violent reaction. Good. He didn't think he could stand for any questions right now. At the moment it took all his will and focus just to put one foot in front of the other now, just to walk forward and pretend he hadn't left a dear friend behind. Hayata followed and touched a hand to his arm. He may yet remember. It's best he doesn't. He whispered back. You know why? Her lips parted to reply, closed now as she began to recall that painful scene. She had been there, too, stood by and watched as he tore the dung-eater limb from limb. That monster may not exist in this world. Bless her kind heart, she saw his pain and still tried to soothe him. If he does, he'll die again. Over and over, as many times as it took to make his death finally stick. Her hand dug into his arm. It was not your fault, my lord. You did not release him. A growl built in his throat. That's no excuse and you know it. Let's go. He kept walking, eye fixed on the academy high above. Time to visit the queen. Rhea Lucaria was much changed from Naruto's last visit. He remembered this awful academy well, recalled the puppets and the traps, those annoying archers and all manner of spells and sorceries here. There was also the Red Wolf of Raidegen, a feral beast he'd been forced to slay in self-defense. Then that annoying trap with the giant and the pesky parrying BSTRD he'd encountered at the end of it. Then of course there had been Renala herself, a madwoman whom he wouldn't kill until much later with Selen's aid. All in all, he recalled it as a long, annoying slog, and had no real longing to deal with it again. This was not that academy. Everything looked cleaner, to start, but also livelier. Once deserted, dusty halls now teemed with new life, commoners, nobles, peasants all from every walk of life, each cut from a different cloth. Little children chased one another through the corridors without a care in the world, waving wooden swords around pretending to be knights. More than a few recognized Radon and paused to cheer at the gentle giant before continuing their merry race. Some of the older lads and lasses were ferrying books to and from the shelves. Were they going to burn them to stay warm? They must be in a bad way if they'd gone this far. Hayata smiled softly at his side. It seems the children are fond of you. The good general had the grace to cough into a fist to hide his flush. So it would seem. Naruto shrugged one shoulder and followed, not quite sure what to say, or if he should say anything at all. He felt like an outsider here, now more than ever. These people were safe. More than that, they were happy. He'd just muck it all up if he stayed. It proved a depressing thought. Do I even belong here? Hey, don't go thinking like that. A flash of long red hair shifted in his peripherals, causing him to stiffen. It didn't belong to Radon. He rounded on them just in time to see a young girl dart around the corner. That couldn't be Rani, not when she was holding sway over that puppet body. Which meant it could only be one of 3 people, none of whom he wanted to meet right now. It also presented another, unlikely possibility. This could be someone new, someone different, one of Radon's children. He'd mentioned having 3, with a 4th on the way. Nope. Naruto shook his head and kept walking after his guide, not dealing with whoever that is. They encountered still more strangers as Radon led them to the library. Thankfully, he recognized none of them. Just as well, because this lot proved more vocal. Within a matter of minutes the people were cheering his name, hailing him as though he were some long-lost hero. Several even dared to bow. Renala's son shook hands with whomever he could, spoke with more, and led them ever onward, ever upward. Finally they took one last lift and ascended into an area most familiar. Radon heaved a sigh. Here we are. Let's be done with this and have a meal, eh? Naruto shrugged. Sure, don't mind him. Hayata tugged at his arm. He's a bit grumpy when he's hungry. A wry smile touched his lips despite his best efforts. I am not. You are, my lord. At Radon's touch the doors parted. Now they came to the grand library itself. Naruto tensed inwardly at the sight, but no attack came. What was once a dim room home to moldering shelves, dusty tomes, and wretched girls biting at his feet, it had since been retrofitted into something of a large audience chamber with what looked like a large throne at the end of the hall. He could see someone sitting on it. I should warn you, Radon rumbled, Mother can be a bit odd at times. She has ever been fond of foreigners that come to court. Okay, no, you misunderstand. Radon shook his head, setting his great crimson mane swaying. She is fond of them. His warning didn't make much sense, nor did he have a chance to ponder it, because there, seated atop that throne, was Lady Renala.